The following aviation narrative and its two separate branching stories are based on information from three United States Air Force Aircraft Investigation Board's findings obtained through FOIA requests. Although some personal data was redacted, multiple public domain sources such as newspaper accounts, aircraft, hiking, genealogical, and military history websites are used sparingly to fill in those omissions, add supplementary facts, and restore some information as identifiers for clarity in recounting these events. Where possible, genuine photographs, scanned articles, and film footage relevant to the stories are presented. However, this is not always possible as some material simply does not exist. Equivalent materials, or altered images or film footage via AI manipulation are sometimes utilized in order to properly illustrate all the incidents herein.
Hello, this is Tom from the Original Max Afterburner channel. We're at the head of the Butterfly Trail on Mount Lemmon, 40 miles northeast of the Tucson, Arizona metropolitan area. Today's goal is to locate the wreck of an F-86D Sabre that crashed nearby here. Once we locate the wreck, we'll explore aircraft 523623. After we visit the site, the video will continue as we learn the fate of the two pilots involved specifically in this mishap. But before we do that, let's hear the story of how this fighter jet ended up on this mountain.
In 1957, the protection of the entire continental United States airspace was under the charge of the Air Defense Command. This responsibility was further subdivided into air divisions, each covering specific regions of the U.S. One such unit was the 34th Air Division. It was responsible for a large portion of the southwestern geography of the United States. This included Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, a portion of Texas, and Arizona. An all-defense fighter known as the F-86D Sabre Dog made up a large part of that air defense. Its very recognizable black nose that housed specialized radar distinguished it in appearance from the other F-86 fighter variants. 2,500 Sabre Dogs in all were assigned to the air bases of the Air Defense Command. It was considered quite advanced so that it could often saturate the pilot with all its added complexities of cockpit tasking. This is sometimes referred to as a helmet fire, as the pilot struggles to keep up, causing his brain to figuratively catch on fire. The 34th Air Division was headquartered at Kirtland Air Force Base near Albuquerque, New Mexico, and had been under the command of General Wendell Bowman since July 1953. However, after 4 years as commander, he was being promoted to vice commander of the Central Air Defense Force, which controlled a broad area of the Midwest and was based at Richards-Gabar Air Force Base in Missouri. Taking Bowman's place in the leadership of the 34th was Colonel Frederick Terrell. As those familiar with the military, change of command ceremonies can be quite a production, and this would be no exception. In honor of this observance, F-86 aircraft from the 15th Fighter Interceptor Squadron from Davis Mountain Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona would participate. The plan was to send 3 flights designated as red, white, and blue elements of 3 F-86D jets each, and 2 spare aircraft for a total of 11 fighters. After arriving in New Mexico and a rest period, the jets would take flight again for a flyover above all those in attendance as leadership roles were transferred. In the early morning of July 8, 1957, flight line crews readied the jets for the mission, while the pilots gathered for their briefing on navigation and weather. The pilots arrived at the tarmac and began their pre-flight checks. Once red, white, and blue elements along with the spares were ready, the aircraft began heading towards the main runway for their launch. They took off from Arizona at 10:30 a.m. local time. It was not a total milk run, as pilots would build up experience in flight hours, practice their navigation skills, all while performing a tactical profile training mission during the flight over to arrive in New Mexico an hour and a half later at approximately 12 noon local time. The trip from Davis-Monthan to Kirtland was uneventful. After deplaning and arrest, a briefing of the event flyover was conducted. However, bad weather closed in on the Kirtland Air Force Base area and the ceremonial flight was canceled. Rather than staying overnight, the return flight to Arizona was planned and all the F-86 aircraft would depart at 1700 local time. They would fly in a loose snake formation to start. The plan was to rendezvous at 25,000 feet above the Catalina Mountains, bordering northern Tucson, and then merge into two diamond formations of 4 jets each, and the remaining 3 F-86s establishing themselves in a separate flight group. After accomplishing all this, they would do a flyby over Davis-Monthan Air Force Base before landing. Lieutenant Gerrit Gerry Van Vliet in the White No. 3 jet F-86D Tail 523623 was experiencing radar problems and formed up on the right wing of Major Joe Killian, who was White No. 4 for the mission and would assist Van Vliet getting back to Arizona. Van Vliet had 727 total flying hours, with 318 hours of those in the F-86, and who would celebrate his 25th birthday the following day. At approximately 17:48 local time, less than an hour after takeoff, members of White Flight began to form up with White No. 1 as the leading F-86 flown by Lieutenant Robert Arbuckle. The White No. 2 jet F-86D tail number 523605 on Arbuckle's right wing was flown by First Lieutenant Joseph James Onate, who had 644 flying hours, with 266 hours of those in the F-86D at the time. Arbuckle and Onate would next be joined by Van Vliet. Also to join the 4-ship diamond formation lastly in the slot position would be Major Joe Killian, who would help Van Vliet navigate home during his radar issues. As Van Vliet made his way over from the snake formation prior to joining up with Whites 1 and 2, he mistakenly believed Onate in the No. 2 aircraft was on the left wing of Arbuckle in the lead aircraft. Van Vliet came in from below to position himself on the right wing of Arbuckle in White No. 1. Van Vliet was momentarily distracted observing the red flight formation further away. He failed to see Onate, who was already on the right wing of Arbuckle's aircraft, and Onate couldn't see Van Vliet climbing towards him since Van Vliet was in Onate's blind spot. The tail of Van Vliet's jet collided with the forward belly of Onate's jet. Both aircraft then violently pitched upward and both out of control. Major Joe Killian ordered them to bail out over the radio. Both pilots of the colliding jets ejected successfully. Van Vliet's F-86 tail 523623 crashed into the Mount Lemmon area of the Catalina Mountains. Both Van Vliet and Onate floated down onto Mount Lemmon. As Van Vliet neared the ground, his chute snagged a tree and he was thrown into the side of the mountain against his back. He then left his chute up in the tree to help mark his location. Onate landed in some trees that kept him stable and from being dragged. He rolled up his parachute and saw Van Vliet's chute in the tree and walked towards that location, taking 2 hours just to walk the 1-mile distance to him in the rugged terrain. Van Vliet and Onate were reached by civilian rescuers at 9 p.m. at about 7,000 feet of elevation. Due to the treacherous landscape, they all decided to spend the cold and rainy night under one of the parachutes. While waiting for daybreak, the flyers recounted their experiences during the midair collision.
It all happened too fast, almost before you could realize it. I didn't see a thing. I guess I lost my tail section. Major Killian yelled over the radio for us to get out. It would have been better to fall free at first, but I kept thinking about those mountains. The wind blew me away from Tucson. I could see it until I hit the clouds, and then I wondered if I'd hit the ground while still in the cloud. When I broke out, I still had 4,000 feet to go. I didn't see a thing until I felt the collision. After impact, the nose went up and I felt a loss of control. I think I lost a wing, but I'm not sure. At the same time, Major Killian told us to bail out immediately. I was upside down and pulling away from the seat. I had trouble reaching the armrest to prepare for ejection. I jettisoned the canopy, hesitated a moment, and ejected. The automatic lap belt release cut away my seat.
The entire group started walking out of the mountains the next morning at 5 a.m. and reached safety 3 hours later at 8 a.m. A United States Air Force flight surgeon found they only had light cuts and bruises, mainly from the hike through the mountains. At the time, it was believed that the two jets had probably tangled up together and crashed in a single massive metal clump, since there was only one crash and explosion witnessed. However, after the wreckage on Mount Lemmon had been located and examined, it was determined to be only Van Vliet's jet 523623. Air Force investigators were mystified as to what happened to Lieutenant O'Nate's F-86 because no one had witnessed or reported a crash of another aircraft. Two cowboys found the scattered wreckage of O'Nate's fighter jet on Monday, October 7, 1957, 3 months after the original accident. Ironically, O'Nate's F-86D tail number 523605 righted itself and continued on until it ran out of fuel and crashed in a remote area near Truth or Consequences, about 7 miles east of Elephant Butte Lake, New Mexico, which was a remarkable 350 miles away from Mount Lemmon. Ultimately, the Air Force Investigation Board found that 1. Operator Arrows blamed on Lieutenant Van Vliet by failing to exercise due caution when entering the formation and colliding with O'Nate. 2. Lieutenant Van Vliet is also blamed for failing to take the proper position as briefed prior to flight. 3. Supervisor Arrows faulted for not properly briefing and clarifying to ensure all flight participants understood. 4. That the 15th Fighter Interceptor Squadron did not have well-defined procedures for formation flying. And 5. A lack of training for formation flying. So now that that part of the story is over, let's head out to the wreck site of Van Vliet's F-86 Sabre Dog, and after we visit the wreckage site of 523623, we'll return to the tales of Van Vliet and O'Nate. As we make our way from the trailhead to the wreck site, it's about 2.5 to 3 miles inward. It might not sound like much, but the trail is very difficult terrain and hard physically with a 1,000-foot elevation change each way, so you'll feel it in your legs the next couple of days. My big hope was finding the engine disk I found last time abandoned on the trail on my previous trip and return it to the main wreck site. I hid it away slightly and marked its GPS point since I wasn't going to be able to return it that day. When we approached, my navigation unit sounded an alert, and luckily the F-86 piece was still there, though it had shifted. And Katie and Peter, who joined me that day, posed with it after we got it up from my hiding spot. Once you reach the wreck site, the first main section you come upon is this aft section of the fuselage with an inner corrugated lining that went around the engine. I'm not an F-86 expert, but I'm guessing this is where one of the speed brakes was located, maybe the right side and inverted, but the flap is missing. I'm not sure 100%, but maybe someone could properly identify it. Of course, you have to take your obligatory pictures with your finds. Take only pictures and leave everything else in its place, as they say. Past this piece is the largest surviving part, about 100 feet onwards, which is the GE J47 engine. Unfortunately, I guess a lot of 5-year-olds have been allowed to get there because they're writing graffiti on the parts now, which had remained pristine for decades until recently. It's kind of sad to see. They'll probably be cursed by the ghosts of the pilots from now on. I'm kind of shaky with the camera and should have left it on a tripod, but the still images came out nicely. One other big section out there is the right wing and main gear from that side. The area was pretty overgrown and it wasn't readily apparent to see, and I was pretty beat and not looking forward to the hike back out, so we'll have to try and document it on another visit. I give an overview here, and you can see these large tubes on this section as compared to the other GE J47 that had better days. In the foreground of the picture, you can see that we've returned that engine disk. I hope it stays out there for all those that seek this area and to share in its discovery. My greatest fear, of course, is that someone else will try to remove it again and deprive so many others that would like to explore and experience a piece of history instead of read about it. I'm going to turn it around.
That's a good picture.
At the very end of this video, I look forward to you joining us for a quick interview with my hiking partners for the day from the Southern Arizona Rescue Association. Although this F-86 incident was over in 1957, the story actually continues because our two pilots branched off onto their own separate paths, only to be confronted with catastrophic destinies. Let's turn back the clock again, leading us to May 1964 in Florida, almost 7 years after the F-86 midair collision between Lieutenants Van Vliet and O'Neill over Mount Lemmon. The Air Force had been taking the very first deliveries of a new aircraft, the F-4C Phantom II fighter jet, only 6 months earlier. Pilots are beginning their training on the jet fighter variant, the latest and greatest in the U.S. arsenal.
We take pilots and navigators from either undergraduate training or other commands, and in the course of a 6-month training program, give them the basic skills necessary to make them a combat-ready aircrew member in the F-4 aircraft. In the initial phases of the training here, you learn to fly the airplane, you learn to handle the airplane as it should be flown. And once you get to the ground attack and the ground attack tactical phase, flying doesn't become second-rate, but it almost has to become second nature.
Among those pilots assigned to master this new aircraft was 31-year-old Captain Joseph O'Neill, the same pilot whose F-86 continued on to New Mexico after the mid-air collision in Arizona in 1957. He was now assigned to the United States Air Force 4453rd Combat Crew Training Squadron of the 836 Air Division located at MacDill Air Force Base near Tampa, Florida. O'Neill by this time had achieved 2,382 hours of flight time, but had only acquired 12 hours so far in the F-4. The extensive instruction included basic flying skills particularly needed for the F-4 Phantom, as well as weapons delivery, namely bombing procedures. On May 22nd, a briefing of mission objectives, the weather, navigation, fuel, and other preparations for weapons computations began at 13:15. The crew stepped to their jets on the flight line to begin the day's flying with engine start at 14:45. The training flight would consist of 4 F-4 Phantom jets in formation to conduct a 30-minute weapons practice mission over Avon Park, Florida, a military gunnery area about 57 miles southeast of MacDill. The mission, designated as base flight, would be led by an experienced instructor pilot with call sign Base Lead, flying an F-4B loaned from the U.S. Navy with a temporary Air Force tail number of 6212170. Base 2 would fly F-4C 637411. Captain O'Neill and his backseat pilot system operator, 28-year-old Captain William F. Burham, would be Base 3. And Base 4 was F-4C 637463. Beginning at 15:10 local time, the fighters began taking off. They all joined in sequence and proceeded to 7,500 feet in altitude. After reaching the bombing range, they were cleared to enter the space at 15:30. Dropping to 2,000 feet and flying at 380 to 400 knots calibrated airspeed, both the crew in the Base Lead Phantom jet and the crew of Base 2 performed their bombing runs as briefed. As Base 3 with O'Neill and Burham passed the target, their bomb pickle tones sounded normally, but they did not call off on top hot to indicate they completed their run with the ordnance having been released. Instead, their airspeed began to diminish rapidly, as did their altitude. They rolled 45 degrees right and were at 100 to 200 feet in altitude. Although outside of the ejection seat envelope, a witness on the range observed that the pilot's canopy ejected from the Base 3 aircraft. The nose then rose and the right wing dropped, with O'Neill and Burham's F-4C immediately crashing into the terrain. Base Lead instructed base numbers 2 and 4 to return to MacDill while he remained to direct rescue forces as he circled the crash site. The F-4 was destroyed, and both O'Neill and Burham had perished in the fireball. The investigation board concluded that O'Neill did not supply sufficient power to maintain airspeed, altitude, and sink rate to recover from the run, and believed that O'Neill and Burham had become too fixated on the target looking backwards for the bomb impact, unable to realize that the jet had been allowed to deviate from a safe flight condition and stalled. In the second path of destiny leading away from the 1957 F-86 midair collision, we return to Gerry Van Vliet. It's 7 years after O'Neill's fatal F-4C Phantom crash, and 14 years, a multiple of 7, since his F-86 run-in. Now a major, Van Vliet had gone on to serve in Vietnam during his Air Force career, having flown 269 combat sorties with 598 hours of flight time in the B-57A Canberra bomber. After returning to the States, Van Vliet was assigned to Hill Air Force Base in Utah in March 1969 as part of the 46th 77th Defense System Evaluation Squadron. By 1971, he was 38 years old, and he had accumulated 4,979 hours of flight time with 1,383 hours in B-57 models. At the Hill Air Force Base tarmac, an B-57A Canberra Tail 52-1490 was due for a functional check flight scheduled for April 13, 1971. The aircraft had been down for maintenance for over 30 days. The mission for this Canberra was essentially a test flight, as the aircraft had had the horizontal stabilizer replaced as well as both the elevators. In addition, the rocket catapult ejection seats had been modified with a technical order upgrade. Major Gerrit Van Vliet was assigned to pilot 52-1490 as well as an electronics warfare officer, master aircraft observer, 43-year-old Lieutenant Colonel George Lagarde. Lagarde had been at Hill since July 1968 and was the chief of aircraft maintenance. They would fly to a test area known as R6404B under Redfern Range Control as requested by Van Vliet. He and Lagarde were assigned a call sign of Grab 64. After fueling, strapping in, and routine ground checks, Grab 64 took off at 12:44 local time from runway 14 with the altimeter set at 3022. They reached the range area R6404B 10 minutes later at just below 24,000 feet. After 18 minutes of flight checks on site, Van Vliet radioed Redfern Control that he was going to depart the eastern edge of the range. Asked if he'd like to transfer to Hill Air Force Base Air Traffic Control, he replied that he would stay with Redfern and go VFR. Redfern then directed him on a 075-degree heading into Squawk 1400 Mode 3 ident. Van Vliet and Lagarde complied, and the squawk code was picked up on the radar screen. Redfern confirmed by radio that they saw Grab 64 leaving the range. Grab 64 acknowledged with a simple mic click. 5 sweeps of the radar scope occurred after the 1400 code registered on the screen, but then Van Vliet and Lagarde's plane disappeared off radar at 13:15, now only 21 minutes after the B-57A had reached the test area. Search and rescue helicopters were sent out and at 6 p.m. discovered an oil slick, plane debris, orange dye marker, and parachute remnants on the western edge of the Great Salt Lake about 10 miles north of Carrington Island, indicating the B-57 had crashed there in about 50 feet of water and that both crew members had perished. Analysis of the wreckage determined that a mechanical or accidental electrical detonation in part of the flight control column led to a separation of the elevator push-pull rod system that caused abrupt and complete loss of flight control. Van Vliet would not have had the ability to recover the bomber, and there had been no time to eject. I hope all who have watched this video are reminded that seemingly routine events can sometimes lead to horrific consequences, and that there are brave people who still embrace the challenges, even when the risk to themselves can be great, for the benefit of others.
Hello, as you saw, I had 2 hiking friends today to return that F-86 engine part to its rightful place. They are members of the Southern Arizona Rescue Association, also known as SARA, who have literally rescued thousands of lost and injured hikers, as well as returned remains of less fortunate trekkers. They have also participated in numerous search and rescue operations in times of natural disasters. So if you'd like to join this group, or learn more about this group, or even make a donation, we'll have a link to their website below. And I want to introduce you first to Katie. So why don't you tell us a little about your involvement and what you like about SARA, and how long you've been with SARA, and how many rescues have you been on? So that's a lot of questions.
Yeah, so I've been a part of SARA for a little over a year now. So I've been a candidate rescuer, and soon Peter and I will both be full rescuers. But I've been on over 30 missions so far. I've had a lot of really successful rescues. We've had some body recoveries where we were fortunate enough to return some closure to the loved ones of people who passed away. And it's been very valuable. It's very rewarding to be a part of these missions and really make a difference and give back to our community.
Excellent. And to my right, I have Peter, or I have the same questions for you.
Hello, I've been in SARA for about a year. Me and Katie were actually in the same incoming class. I've been on about 24 rescues, and my favorite thing about SARA is the community. I mean, apart from the missions, we hang out all the time. We do challenge hikes like this. We do a lot of different trainings as well. So we look forward to having you at our monthly meetings every Friday at the SARA house at 7:30. And you can find us on our Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media app that you use. Katie, do you want to tell them what our handle is?
Yeah, so if you search Southern Arizona Rescue Association, our Facebook and our website will come up. We also have an Instagram that's at Southern_Arizona_rescue. We also have a TikTok under the same handle, so check us out.
All right, fantastic. We had a great day today.
We sure did.
Yep.